a huge thanks for joining us today for a discussion on hiring and retaining underrepresented engineers. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Karat. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack channel for answers to some of your questions in the hiring channel. We may also have the time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Josie Haynes, and I'm the VP of Software Engineering and Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Tile. Today, I'll be joined by some amazing panelists, including Taufik, Michelle, Miriam, and Shannon. And so let's get started with some introductions here. So starting with Taufik. He is the Senior Director of Engineering at Etsy. He was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and is a veteran technology leader and brings more than 20 years of experience building high-performance teams and award-winning products across multiple industries. He currently is the Engineering Director for Etsy's Mobile Engineering Group, driving both platform and product development. Previously, he ran Etsy's core seller services group, responsible for Etsy's payments, shipping, and listing teams, and was CTO for Makers Row, a marketplace startup. Taufik credits a Tandy TRS-80 pocket computer received in his teens for sparking his interest in technology. When not coding or coaching engineers, he can be found playing ping pong, volunteering, or pulling off Lego master builds with his son. Thank you, Taufik, for being here. Next is Michelle Brenner. She is a senior software engineer at Netflix with 10 years of experience in tech, from engineering support to manager. She runs an interview format tech podcast called From the Source that examines what tech jobs are really like. A Philadelphia native that now calls Los Angeles home, she is an art school graduate and a self-taught engineer. She enjoys making it easier for others to create great things, from artists to entrepreneurs. Michelle works to promote diversity and inclusion in tech through conference speaking and organizing, mentoring, board membership, and making sure everyone knows they belong here. Thank you, Michelle, for being here. Our next panelist is Miriam Deanna. She is a senior engineering manager at Pathstream, where she supports the teams that build the main product and marketing sites. And prior to her current role, she served as a senior software engineer and engineering manager. She led an apprenticeship program, hired internal and external career changers for engineering roles, and supported them through their transition. She has worked at companies of all sizes, from Fortune 500 to early stage startups in a variety of domains. Miriam's passion is proving technology and the jobs surrounding it are not for the elite. Thank you, Miriam, for joining us today. And finally, but last but not least, we have Shannon here, who's the head of solutions engineering at Karat. Shannon started her career writing software over 20 years ago and has moved through the ranks as an engineer and ultimately CTO. She is passionate about improving developer productivity so that dreams and innovations can be built. As head of solutions engineering at Karat, Shannon works closely with engineering teams to understand their hiring bars, align interviews to them, and create more predictive hiring processes. She lives in San Francisco with her 2 dogs, Samus and Lockie. Thank you, Shannon, for being here today. And so, those were our introductions, but let's get started. I'm excited to be moderating this panel today and getting to hear insights from these amazing panelists. After almost personally leaving the tech industry in early 2018, I've come to realize how crucial it is to retain women and underrepresented minorities in tech. So let's get on to the questions and learn some strategies around this crucial topic. So my first question is, hiring candidates from underrepresented backgrounds can feel like the hot topic at every tech company these days. But as tech leaders, this needs to be a core part of your day-to-day. And so why is that so? Miriam, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. So I feel like it doesn't necessarily need to be. We've seen companies like Coinbase and Basecamp take stances that some could see as very pro-uniformity. It's not a necessity in and of itself, but for people like myself, I actually chose the company where I am because they explicitly stated that they want to take a stance of identifying misogyny and white supremacy, especially in engineering. And in an industry like this, realizing that it's mostly white male dominated and that it presents certain barriers or challenges for people who don't fit into the group, I saw that as a win. And a lot of people right now are looking for jobs based on diversity. They are deciding if they're going to apply for jobs based on diversity and if they're going to accept offers based on what those companies are able to provide. In addition to that, I value creativity, innovation, collaboration, and I feel like those things are most readily available with diversity of thought from people of different backgrounds. So I think that's why it's important, but it doesn't have to be for every company, and for each job seeker, they need to make those decisions for themselves.
Thank you for those insights. Michelle, did you have other insights you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to say it needs to be top of mind because it's so easy not to do it. If you think about you're having a busy work day and you want to just get some lunch, are you going to order the takeout from the same place that you always get it? Or are you going to spend an hour looking on like Yelp to find like a new restaurant and then like pick a new dish? No, you're not going to do it. You're going to say, oh, I'm too busy for that. I'm just going to get that same sandwich I always get, right? So when it's not a priority, you're just not going to do it because it's not easy. So I think it's really important to say that it's equally or above more important than just looking for the skills that you want. Otherwise, you won't do it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Does anybody have any other insights they want to add?
I do. And it's interesting because I had an early opinion that this was the right thing to do, and I still stand by that. However, I was clued into a book called The Medici Effect that actually added a lot more color to what I already understood. And the premise of the book, I think, holds true in this case, which is innovation comes from diverse teams. There is a cost, and for companies who want to stay ahead of the curve, they're going to need to rely and lean on the learnings, the perspectives that happen when you like cull from diverse sources. So that aspect really resonates with me, especially when you look at how things have changed, how businesses are forced to innovate and to chart into new areas. What we did yesterday isn't what we're going to be doing tomorrow. And the only way you're going to be able to do that are by hiring folks who have different experiences, different perspectives, and they bring all of that together to help kind of chart what a future vision is going to look like. So it's an imperative for companies who really think like those things are important.
Absolutely. Thank you for those insights. And so I think that actually nicely leads into my next question, which is, how do we ensure candidates don't just feel like the diversity candidate during the interview process? And Miriam, did you have some insights there?
Yeah, so I thought this was an interesting question because I thought back over my career and said to myself, have I ever felt like I was a diversity hire? Like, is that something that people are sitting in the seat thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm a diversity hire? And so I was trying to think of like what types of things someone might say or do that would give me that impression. And I think the main thing that I came to was inauthenticity. So if someone is speaking to me in a way that does not seem natural for them, or like they're trying to say the right thing or not say the wrong thing, or be very specific to me as a candidate, whether it be because of the way that I look or because of my background, then that could make me feel uncomfortable. Generally speaking, I feel like if we are focusing on the talent of the person, the experiences, the accomplishments, and their particular career development, if we focus on those things, which should be, part of the decision process of whether or not we want to hire someone, then we're going to get into some of the uniqueness that is coming from their background. But we don't have to make that the focus, if that makes sense. So if someone is speaking to me in ways that maybe like they may consider to be a urban vernacular, but it doesn't seem natural for them, that would make me feel like I might be a diversity hire.
Yeah. Anybody else have insights here they want to share? All right. I mean, I've had this happen before where I've definitely felt a little bit like the diversity candidate. And I think it's, around some of the things that people say, just adding to the Miriam's insights there. It's when you hear like, oh, we want to increase diversity, but then they're not actually focusing on inclusion. It's just like the numbers game. And, really, it has to be authentic why you're trying to increase diversity and not just having it be for the numbers. My next question for the group is, what strategies do you employ to build more diverse pipelines of candidates? Michelle, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, so the hard way is to increase the diversity of your networks, pound the pavement, go to different conferences, go to different events, either virtually or in person, talk to people, kind of grow your network. But the cheat code is to partner with nonprofits that have already built up these communities. Places like Dev Color, Tech by Choice, Latinas in Tech, they already have the access to the community. So partnering with them not only, gives them a boost, it also gives you a boost in your recruiting because they know what you're doing wrong. Like they know what's keeping people from joining your organization. So it's basically, it's the tech recruiting version of, paying for a skill that you don't have and letting other people handle it for you.
Nice, thank you. And Tawfiq, it looked like you had something you wanted to add as well.
Yeah, so Michelle touches on a really important kind of subject, which is the fallacy of the pipeline problem. So there's several groups, Dev Color, et cetera, that she mentioned, that's where these underrepresented engineers are. And organizations need to take it upon themselves to prioritize like hiring. So one anecdote. So at Etsy, we looked at Grace Hopper and we knew that there were a ton of talented engineers that were there. And we were very intentional around looking, sourcing, getting their list, establishing a rubric for candidates that coming out of that program. And I imagine other organizations can take similar approaches around the intentionality for looking for folks. There's Blacks in AI. There's several organizations in which these communities can coalesce. So I just want to plus one what Michelle mentioned and just speak to the fact that those folks are out there.
Absolutely. Yes, it's not a pipeline problem, despite that being a common phrase in the industry. And so to continue with the interview process, how have you structured your candidate evaluation process to ensure that all candidates are being fairly evaluated based on their necessary skills and competencies instead of likability? Shannon, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I love this question. It's so important, especially if you want to, ensure that you have the opportunity for diversity in your hiring, which is I agree with all the panelists in this conversation. But I want to touch a little bit on what Tawfiq said and just kind of amplify rubric, measurement, right? So there are some steps that folks can take. So at Karat, we conduct the first round of interviews. We actually have a very structured rubric. We have about 70 different inputs throughout a 1-hour process. But the most important part of that is actually taking a step back and defining your competencies clearly, making sure that you're avoiding ambiguous technical interview questions. Don't make assumptions about where people are coming from. You know, somebody who went to MIT and they're interviewing somebody who's trying to change their life through, you know, a code academy and has the competencies and skills that you're looking for. If you're asking them questions or about, you know, video games or some, you know, concept that you learned at MIT or some top tech school, then you're automatically kind of, you know, losing your ability to hire diverse candidates. You also need to train your interviewers, you know, and review their performance over time. Make sure that you measure your candidate performance consistently and establish like a very clear hiring bar. And what's really important for all of these steps is that you're actually measuring and tracking data for each step in the process. Every interviewer is going to perform differently. You need to make sure that they're trained, but you also need to QC the work that they're doing. If you have diverse candidates coming through and they continue to drop off at the same person, you probably should, you know, evaluate that interviewer or the process at that point in time. And so again, if you take one thing away, it's what Tawfiq said, which is rubrics, and data.
Absolutely. Thank you for that insight. And speaking of rubrics, this actually nicely leads into the next question. And, you know, Shannon and Tawfiq, I'd love to hear, you know, how do you leverage these rubrics and how can you apply it for both technical and soft skills?
So I'll weigh in here. One thing that I've seen that is an effective way of leveraging these are the Snapshoot panels ahead of time. So those panels will be a way for you to sort of say, all right, here are the signals that we want to get from our incoming candidates. It could be around delivery, it could be around communication, et cetera. And when we think about a rubric, it's good to establish, or it's important to establish, what's a good answer? What's a okay answer? What's a bad answer? And what does that look like? And if you think about that ahead of time, it makes it really clear when the interview is over, how to score these candidates. And you'll know, and if everyone agrees on what those criteria are ahead of time, it removes a lot of the ambiguity. So yes, rubrics, thinking about the shape of candidates and think about what good, better, best, or whatever scale you have in terms of your answers. I think all goes to that end.
Yeah, I love that. I think, you know, we do have some structured rubrics around communication skills, but it's not, you know, communication skills as in do you speak English, right? I mean, I think that's just ridiculous. I think, you know, it's more around, did they understand, you know, some of the concepts that you were speaking to them about around the competencies that you're expecting, you know, did you understand as an interview or interview engineer, as we call them, you know, did you understand what concepts they were trying to convey to you? Did they take a step back, stop, think through, and so on? You know, I think as far as creating a structured rubric, I hope it's okay to just go into that quickly. You know, to me, there are 3 important things to do. One is, of course, identify the competencies that are relevant to the job. And actually, I want to touch a little bit on what Tawfiq was saying, which is that if you take a step back and you look at how you level your internal engineers and how you review their progress and you know, how adept they are at the competencies that you're looking for leveling internally, you can take that as a start. And then, like Tawfiq was saying, right, build your structured rubric with good, better, best, or here's L1, here's L2, here's an L3 answer, right? And then as a team, you can decide, okay, we agree on the structure around our reviews process. We're going to take that and we agree that we need an L2 person with these specific competencies. Here's, you know, a list of candidate actions and results. And then at the end, that third piece is summarize a completed interview rubric into an actual hiring recommendation. So, you know, identify beforehand what answers they need to be at this level in order to be successful on site. And I think those are just critical and taking away that subjectivity that we talked about earlier, which is the likability. Of course, we want to like folks, but we need culture add, which is more important.
I wanted to add something that Shannon just said made me think about how Sometimes it's not a matter of whether someone gets hired or not, but they could be leveled a lot lower than their counterparts based on the way that the interview. So I like that whole concept of like using your leveling system to interview, and as a part of the assessment, having the good, better, best, but also having some levels in there so that that conversation, if you're going to offer the person a job, is going to be a direct follow-up about their level and what you're going to be providing them or offering them in compensation. A lot of times underrepresented groups get paid less for the same jobs, even though they pass, the interview.
Thank you, Shannon and Miriam, for those insights. I think a lot of companies think they have structured interviews just because they have a sheet of paper where they've listed all the interview questions. And, it's really great, like diving into what does structured interviewing actually mean? How do we reduce bias? And we got a question in the Q&A that actually adds to this that I thought we could touch on here, which is, are there scenarios where rubrics can be biased? And how do you handle the situation where the panel members are suggesting rubrics that seem to be biased to a group of people?
Yes, I'll answer this. In short, yes, the rubric can be biased. It can be biased to a temperament or a type of personality. If there's someone who's very introverted and we're expecting a certain type of communication, it may be that their competency is there, but they're not going to be a team lead, or they're not going to be the person that's going to lead a project or speak to other stakeholders in the company. Doesn't mean that they can't do the job. So just like anything else in hiring, yes, the rubric can definitely be biased.
To add to that. Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
That's okay. I just gonna do real quick. I think one of the words that I hear all the time that can be very biased is potential. Is you'll grade some people on potential one way and the exact same skills a different person another way. So I think that's a place where you need to be really careful and really define what potential means. Is it they've learned something before that was really hard, so they can show they can do it again? Or is it just like they seem like nice, they seem like they have a lot of potential because they seem nice? So just being careful on the words that you use and being very specific on the skills they represent.
All big pluses to what Michelle and Miriam mentioned. A note on rubrics, they're not the end all be all. There's an element of gut checking some of the assumptions that you're baking in there. So if you're, for example, hiring on communication, and for whatever reason you're looking at, hey, a really great answer is they're energetic. Is that, for example, is that an objective way of saying that this person is going to be able to contribute to a conversation? Having that up front is a good way of gut checking from a panel, like some of the ways that you're attempting to grade incoming folks. So, which also leads to, it's even more effective when you have a diverse group being part of a panel, because you will get diversity of perspectives and opinions. So it's almost like a virtuous cycle here, but that's another topic. So be willing to be challenged, be willing to be questioned, be willing to have those assumptions refined, I guess would be my guidance.
And to answer the question of like, how do you handle a situation where the panel members are like proposing a bias rubric? I guess for me, there's two scenarios here. Either they're proposing it and they know it's biased, or more than likely they're unaware and maybe it's biased towards something that they are passionate about. So for instance, if you have a panel that is mostly back-end engineers, and they're assessing someone who's front end, they might give more credence to, the things that they're interested in or that they see as valuable. And I think that that's where middle management really comes in. The person who is the hiring manager or the person who is overseeing that interview process needs to have a commitment to mitigating unconscious bias as much as possible. I don't think that there's any way to completely eliminate it, but there needs to be an oversight, someone who's looking at the whole panel, who's looking at the whole process, who's looking at the onboarding process and determining if there is a possibility of bias in different areas, and then addressing them as necessary.
Yeah, I want to kind of plus one what everybody is saying, and thank you, Miriam. I think to me, it's also a matter of measurement and iteration over time, just like software, right? I mean, we track our progress when it comes to making our code more efficient, more effective, and so on and so forth. I think that, you know, we should take our hiring process just as seriously, because we're actually building the future of our business, and it has a huge impact on all of our days. And so I think we need to be taking those measurements, ensuring that we're re-looking at them over and over and over again. I think another thing that we can do is essentially, and I think it's very important we do this at Karat as well, which is to ask the candidates in a structured manner afterwards about their experience. So make sure that you have some sort of a candidate feedback survey, and a structured candidate feedback survey where you can take that data and, you know, look at that data over time based on the diversity of the candidate as an example. And so make sure that you have those metrics in place, make sure that you're monitoring them like you would your systems, but also ensure that you're hearing from the candidates themselves, and then building all of that back into this kind of consistent cyclical process of hiring at your company.
Thank you all for those amazing insights, and I, you know, plus one to all of them. And I think, you know, the underlying theme that I hear is really, you know, you have to have a culture where people can speak up and say, hey, you know, I think there is a little bit of bias potentially in one of these questions. Can we discuss this, right? And having that be a norm in your company. So many times, like when somebody calls out bias, it's like, oh my gosh, am I a horrible person? But guess what? We're all biased. Like, even those of us on this panel who think about it, I'm sure sometimes say biased things unintentionally. And it's really about, you know, starting with creating a company culture where somebody can say, hey, I think that might have been a biased opinion. There's a new book called Just Work by Kim Scott, who is the author of Radical Candor, and she calls it bias busting, right? And creating a culture where anybody in the team can feel comfortable to be a bias buster and just say something like, I think that's got a little bit of bias, and having that be okay to say, just like on a day-to-day basis. And I think this actually nicely ties into the next question, which is, you know, hiring candidates from underrepresented backgrounds is actually just one part of the story. We have to be creating inclusive environments to retain them. And so let's start with the onboarding part. What are some strategies that you leverage during onboarding to create an equitable workplace?
So this is something that is actually pretty new for me, and it has to do with how I was onboarded at my current company. But I think that it sets the stage for the types of conversations that can be had, and the types of call outs that are permitted whenever you ask candidates during the onboarding process, like, how would you like to be referred to? Asking them if they have any special needs, which could be anything from I'm colorblind to I am a caregiver for someone and I need this certain part of my day, you know, to do things around the house. Matching them with onboarding buddies that are in the company or team, or maybe in another team as well inside of the company, that exemplify the values that you want to promote within your company. And then also providing them with all the information they need to provide feedback and or address any issues of abuse or discrimination. When you do that from the door, it gives them a sense of this is acceptable, this is permissible, and this is encouraged.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have other things to add there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, yes, absolutely amazing. And it is kind of new, but I would love for companies to start to implement inclusivity training from the get-go, right? So as people are coming forward, make sure that they understand exactly, yeah, you are enabled not just to speak up about, you know, issues in the workplace, but also we have a structure around our meetings. You know, we had a trainer actually come in and train our entire company around inclusivity in meetings, you know, how to make sure that you have an inclusivity yoda, which is somebody who is enabled in the meeting to say, hey, by the way, you've been talking for 2 minutes, they've had their hand raised. surveys to showcase and tell them, hey, you can raise your hand and that yoda will then call on you, and everybody has a role and you have adjusting roles over time. You know, you've note takers and they're not always the woman in the room, right? And I think that's important. So I think inclusivity training is just the other thing. And then, you know, I love the idea of adding surveys throughout the process, but also setting expectations. These are the pieces that we believe that you'll be onboarded on. How do you feel about your onboarding? Do you feel prepared for your next 30 days? Great. Check in at 30 days. Were you prepared for your next 30 days? Awesome. How do we get you prepared for your next 60 days? And then onboarding is also about setting expectations with your manager. Your manager needs to bring you on and work with you closely. So for any leaders here, you know, work with your team closely during the onboarding process and say, look, I'm going to be a little bit more hands-on in the beginning for both of our benefits. So you know what my expectations are and I know what yours are. So they don't feel like they're going, yay, it's amazing, because we hire in arrears. Oh my gosh, they're doing all this work. They make one mistake and then bam, right? Because that's not inclusive either. And people may not, you know, be able to adjust quickly. So I just want to throw that in for all folks that are being onboarded. It's really important to set expectations and work closely with them so that they're set up for success with you too.
I love that whole inclusivity yoda thing. I think that's awesome. And I was smiling when you said that, because we're actually currently rolling out some new meeting processes at Tile, and we actually used yoda as our acronym. And so I thought I was just like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Thank you for that insight. And, you know, to just add to something that, you know, Miriam mentioned, which I do think is so important, is, you know, taking into account everybody's different challenges, right? And I think that's really kind of where diversity comes in, right? I don't have kids, but I have two dogs who to me are my kids, right? And so I don't want somebody to be like, oh, you have to take your dogs to the vet. Like, that's not important, right? But like, to me, that is important. And so it's realizing, like, it's not, diversity isn't even, you know, exactly about things you can see, but you need to actually take some time to understand, like, the you know, the intersectionalities of all of your employees. And I think that is so crucial. And so onboarding, though, is obviously just the beginning of the process. And so we have to be creating inclusive cultures to retain talent for the long term. And so what are some things we can do for that?
So I'd like to build on.
We're in sync, Michelle, but go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I want to build on something that Shannon said about meetings. I feel like meetings are like so representative of how inclusive your organization is. Is it the same person talking all the time? How hard is it to interrupt? Is someone actually like leading the meeting? And then on top of that, how are assignments getting divvied up? Is everyone getting a chance at promotable, very high profile work, or is the same person getting glue work all the time because they volunteer, because they want to be like a team player? Is everyone having a chance to grow their skills, or are people stuck in, you know, this person knows this specific thing very well, so they're going to do this all the time? So just being very aware, not just like letting things go to the easy, you know, ruts that they're in, and instead being very active and making sure that things are going around equitably.
Yeah, of course, plus one to everything Michelle mentioned. The twist that I wanted to put on kind of fostering a culture of inclusivity is a virtuous cycle that happens in when you incentivize certain kinds of behavior. From let's start with your senior engineering cohort. So it's really important that they exhibit leadership principles, and that's not just in the domain of management. And those principles will lend itself to doing things like participating in onboarding, making it feel like it's their responsibility to sort of help others and level up. And when that's incentivized by the way of how you set competency, how we think about promotions and who we promote, then what happens is, for folks who may not feel like they're part of a team, these leaders are the ones that can be the front line in engaging those individuals and helping to onboard and helping to level up They can be onboarding buddies and et cetera. So that's one piece here, sort of incentivizing the kind of behavior that leads to an inclusive culture. The other, and I find personally satisfying, are like nurturing an ERG community. Like the ERGs here at Etsy, I love being a part of them because there's a place that I can go with folks who have similar interests. And there's others in which I can express intersectionality. I'm a parent. I happen to be a Black engineering person. So those are things that I think help to give me a sense that I can be here, and there are folks who are like me here that I think companies need to ensure they're investing in. And then the leaders in the companies need to ensure that they're showing up for those groups. I tell a story all the time. Even the CEO of Etsy, when he was the sponsor, the executive sponsor for our ERG, he wore the T-shirt. He talked about it. He showed up. He listened. He did actions. It's not performative, and that meant a lot. So I think leaders need to show up, and the notion of leadership needs to permeate throughout, from the top ranks down to the individual contributors.
Absolutely. Thank you for those insights. And, one of the things that, I bring up all the time is, it's the leaders who are doing the majority of the hiring, and they're the ones that are interacting with the team on a day-to-day basis. So they're really the ones setting the culture and the tone and the hiring practices. So it's not just about, having a DEI person in HR or having even the exec team care. Like, if it's not permeated throughout the entire leadership team of a company, it's very hard to be successful. And so my next question is, toxic cultures can impact retention in tech. Shannon, do you want to share more about that and how we can limit that happening?
Yeah, gosh, toxic culture, it starts in the interview process too. I've gone into interviews where they look at my resume and they're like, oh, I must be in the wrong room. Or they ask you out during an interview. It just, all of these ridiculous things can start there. But, I think toxicity comes in many forms. There's a ton of bias that's injected, but you really, again, I always go back to tracking data across the organization. Look at your attrition numbers. If 8 out of 10 of the last people who left are women, but only about 50% of your organization are women, you probably should take a deeper look. And I think, one of the most important things that people can do in situations is to make sure that you're tracking and surveying your teams. Make sure that you always understand where people are feeling. Do they feel included? Do they feel like there's toxicity? Do they feel like they have a place to go if somebody makes an offhand comment about how they got, promoted? I think another huge important piece of this is transparency. So being transparent about what does success look like, have structure around leveling and have everybody agree to that structure. Ensure that is everyone aligned on what that means. Do people understand what is necessary to grow their careers? As a manager, you can dedicate your one-on-ones to the person's individual goals and give honest and consistent feedback and a path to growth within the company. Toxicity can happen when we don't have a voice, but it also happens when we don't have a true understanding of why decisions are being made and why some people are being promoted and others are not. And then you start to hear that kind of like whispering and, oh, well, I'm better at this than them and so on. But if you have consistency in your, performance rubrics as well as your interviewing rubrics, and they're all aligned and everybody understands what is necessary to be successful, it's important. If you get to a review process, by the way, and somebody doesn't understand that and they're taken by surprise that there's an issue, that's on you as a manager, that's not on them. And so just make sure that you're always reviewing, you're always giving them feedback, always making sure that when they get to the review process, they should know almost exactly what is in that review process, except for maybe the amount of money that you're gonna like. But I think also make sure that as you're measuring, send out surveys all the time, get feedback from your business. You can, make them, they don't give their name. My brain isn't working right now, but essentially making sure that they have the opportunity to speak freely, and then look inward as an organization overall. What are your values? Are you working in siloed values, or do you have a top level value that's permeated throughout your business? And how do you measure that people are actually living those values?
Awesome. Thank you for those amazing insights. Oh, Miriam, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say something. I really appreciate what Shannon was saying. And one thing that I thought about as she was speaking is any toxic environment I've ever known, whether it's at home or at work, there's a certain level of insecurity or distrust there. And so that kind of just goes with everything that she was saying about being clear about what is expected, how people are being assessed, why someone got this job over that person. Like, all those things breed toxicity because people are not clear, they're unsure, they're insecure, and they start not trusting the process or the people that they work with.
Absolutely. And thank you for those insights. And, I think the one thing I'm going to add is you have to be really intentional, because a lot of times it's not a major thing, right? Like when I almost left the tech industry in 2018, I called it was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It wasn't that there was like a huge, event that happened in my workday that was toxic. It was the little things, like people assuming I was not technical, right? And assuming I was the project manager when I walked into meetings, right? It's, the guys would all go out to drinks and like, I'd never be invited, right? So it's realizing that toxicity can be like, it happened in the day-to-day things. So we've got less than 5 minutes left. So I wanted to do one last question. And actually, I'm going to go for one of the questions in the Q&A, which I thought was great, which kind of goes with this, which is, when you have your first underrepresented person joining your team, the first Black person on the team of only white individuals, for example, how do you address or not address this with the joiner in the onboarding period?
I would prefer it be a conversation during the hiring process. So during onboarding, I think it's a bit late for a lot of people. And for me, I've been the first of a few things at most of the companies that I've been at. And it was usually obvious from their website. It wasn't like a surprise. One place in particular, it was in a rural town in Kentucky. And I was literally like, if I saw another person who looked like me at the grocery store, I was excited. So I wasn't, surprised that I was the first of many things. But I think for where I am now in my career as a manager, those are conversations I would like to have with the joiner before onboarding, because it could very well be a point of decision or contention in their process of making accepting an offer.
I wanted to jump in. I think one thing that happens at places like that is they'll only hire at the junior level instead of going with the senior level first. And I think it's not setting people up for success because they're coming in with such a different power differential, and they're already, probably have some imposter syndrome, and they might feel like the diversity candidate and not feel like they fit in. But someone who has 5, 10, 15 years of experience is going to be a lot more confident in what they're doing. And then they'll be able to build a team and really make it work and be that representative that changes things at the company, instead of someone coming in, not feeling good about the company they're at and just immediately leaving and going somewhere else where they feel like they can fit in better.
Yeah, I would, of course, plus one what Michelle has said. And then, of course, I've been the first in many places, but I do think it's important for folks who are coming in to feel like there are folks like them in the organization, and as much of that sort of welcoming stance that the organization can do up front, either discussing like why it's a good place to work here, really should include how that organization embraces inclusivity and what the culture is going to be like. So a bit to Miriam's point as well, but I do think the emphasis should be placed on leadership, because they help set the tone and the power dynamic, everything that Michelle says so spot on.
Yeah, and thanks for those great insights. Plus one to everything that the panelists brought in. And, I totally agree. I think, you really, it's on the team, right? You don't want the individual you're bringing in to feel like the diversity candidate, right? Just as we talked about earlier, it's about having the team feel like an inclusive environment. So when the person joins, you know, they don't feel like the outsider, right? And so that's really on the leaders to be working with the team before the person has been onboarded and creating that inclusive culture, which you can start without any, you know, hires from underrepresented backgrounds, right? Like you don't have to wait for that person to join to start creating the inclusive culture. And so this has gone so fast. We're actually out of time. And I wanted to say thank you so much for all of your great insights in today's panel. I really appreciate having the time to chat with all of you. And we'll be headed over to the Lead Dev Slack channel in the hiring channel. So please head there and we'll continue these discussions. And thank you so much. And we hope to see you again next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Jesse.